So we're in your economics book and we're on the last chapter, which is chapter 14, a cheerful view of our economic future. So we have a cheerful view in the midst of us looking and trusting in the Lord, don't we? Otherwise, our view is pretty dismal, isn't it? If we want to trust in the arm of flesh. So this chapter we're starting out. It's called Refuting the Prophets of Doom, and it starts off with countries that have prosperous markets and economies. Sometimes we experience recessions and depressions, even though, and then again, command economies, socialistic and communistic in nature, suffer severe scarcity and drastic depression sometimes. So, and inflation can inflict any nation. We know that. So, does this mean the world is going to sink into this grim poverty? Is scarcity, items being scarce, is it growing worse in our world? Is it growing worse in our economy? Are natural resources in danger of being exhausted? Is the Earth's population growing too rapidly to supply our goods, or to keep our goods in line with our demands? So, and all of these questions, the answer here is actually no. Why do you see the answer no? When we resounding no, it says, although economics forecast a gloomy future, the answer to all of these questions is a resounding no. So why do we say it's a resounding no? Well, economic difficulties do occur, but that does not mean these troubles have to go worse, So we don't have to look at things getting worse. So our modern society needs biblically based behavior. That's where it's based. If we don't have biblically based behavior, our economy as well as our morality is going to go down the tube, isn't it? So some moral incentives, are very important, and also not only moral incentives, but our imagination and our heart to prosper and to help others is so, to relieve scarcity, to develop new resources, to provide for increasing population, and also to overcome any depletion of natural resources. These are pretty important. So the biggest threats to our financial welfare are what? What are our biggest threats? To our encroaching government. Our encroaching government, as government takes over, or our lack of morality are our biggest threats. So our biggest threats to our financial welfare, yes, the government taking over, because the heart of man is deceitfully wicked beyond measure, and the power in the hands of a few can cause drastic problems. And then again, our morality on a whole. So if we don't adapt virtuous habits and convictions, then we will not prosper. So, and when you think of prosperity in the Bible, it is trusting in the Lord with all our heart, isn't it? So here's a quote here, and let me read this quote. I have it here. Our supplies of natural resources are not finite in any economic sense, nor does past experience give reason to expect natural resources to become more scarce. Rather, if history is any guide, natural resources will progressively become less costly, hence less scarce, and will constitute a smaller proportion of our expenses in the future. This is looking here. So basically say that, yeah, our natural resources are not finite. And some things can become scarce, but history is guide that natural resources will become less costly. So we have to look into history in regard to a lot of these questions. So this replies to the pessimistic predictions that the prophets of doom and gloom in the midst. When I say doom and gloom, there in the Bible we look forward, and we look at the future and we see, in the future there are some big hard times coming, especially when we look into the judgment of God on our world, and we look towards the Great Tribulation period. Well, there's hope even in that, because before the Great Tribulation comes this wonderful, wonderful Exodus, I call, or I should say, the Lord is going to grab us up, or we'll be caught up with Him, because God does take care of His own, doesn't He? So let's go on. I had to add that too. So, questions. Okay, let's go on to the questions. I like this chapter because it presents some questions that we have for the future. So we're going to go back and we'll talk about Thomas Robert Malthus in the 1766 to 1834. But let's go for the questions first. So the first question says, will the world of tomorrow be overpopulated with all the people of the world living in crowded cities like ants in a hill or bees in a hive? When I was in high school, that's what they said. Overpopulation is the main problem. We're all going to end up, and we're not going to even be able to move around in a room. We're going to be packed in, people hitting against each other, like there was a Star Wars episode or Star Trek episode like that. And I'm like, oh no, that's horrible. And so the answer to this, though, is there is little possibility that the world will ever be this crowded. Although many countries are likely to have larger populations in 50 or 100 years from now, the mere fact is that a region's population is increasing is not necessarily an economic problem. So, little possibility, it's not, population growth is not an economic problem. In fact, it may be financial benefit to have more children, because more children will increase our human resources, and more children will be more young people. More people will have more researchers, engineers, scientists, inventors, entrepreneurs, laborers. That's important. If we have too few young people, we're not going to have enough people to fill the jobs at all. We'll just have an older population trying to make ends meet, right? So the young population is so important. Well, that's all important. But what does the Bible say? That's what we want to know. What does the Bible say on this subject? So here, before we go to what the Bible says, let's read this quote. It says, the most important benefit of population size and growth is the increase it brings in the stock of useful knowledge. Minds matter economically as much as or more than hands or mouths. Julian Simmel. And so here's a picture here. Needless to say, Hector Dickelmeyer was skeptical of Wyoming Weekly's report on the imminent danger of global crowding. I love this picture because whenever I think now of population, the population explosion, I think of population being a problem. I've stood out in the midst of Nebraska. I've stood out in the midst of, especially Wyoming, and I haven't seen for miles, every direction on a flat plateau, I have not seen one single person, And I was like, do we really have overpopulation problem? Or even in Nevada. And I've been in Siberia, in Russia, and have done the same thing. So I thought, you know what? These people were very, very wrong saying that population explosion is our major problem. That is certain. So let's see what the Bible says, though. So the Bible makes it clear. So what does the Bible make it clear? That God intended for mankind to populate the entire earth, and that He considers a large population to be a blessing. Wow. That is pretty important to know. So, see, God, in Genesis 9, in Genesis 1 and 2, and on into even Genesis 9, God talks about that. In the first chapter of Genesis, God told Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. And He later issued the same command to Noah and his sons. In Genesis 9, it says, and you be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply therein. So,
And in most cultures, traditionally, have considered children to be blessings. And this is evidenced by the large families seen throughout history and in many places in the world today. These large families are still a blessing. And in the book of Psalms, we read, "Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward." So, the philosophy that the world is so overpopulated, that mankind needs to reduce the number of people, is not of God. So this whole thing on, abortion and not having children and not getting married and all these things, that it is baloney when it comes to the Bible. And we can see it even today, because by the year 2525, we were given a doom message that the world would be so overpopulated that we wouldn't have food even, which has come to be a lie and not of God. Regions and countries with high population do not have to be unpleasant either. In Taiwan, they have a lot of people there. But Taiwan, it has a free market with many thousands there. And the way they have organized everything, it's a pleasant place to be in. And it has a lot of visitors come and tourists visit to see the cities in Taiwan. And as for England, that's another and some of its highest populated area goes on. Now we go on to a lot of different highly populated areas. If they're looking and they're prosperous in a free market, you find it's a pleasant place to be. Some have spectacular high rises, but if the people are living to the standard, as in a free market, you'll find that it's not going to be dismal, right? In that sense. So that's another. So let's go on to the next question. Let's see what the next question is. Oh, first let's read the proverb. "In the multitude of people is the king's honor, but in the want of people is the destruction of the prince." But in the want of people. Well, so anyway, but basically it's saying another one that says, it's not, population is having a family of as many children, with many children, is not a detriment to society. That's baloney. So I always knew that. But question. The next one. Will the production of food be so inefficient for the world's rapidly growing population that widespread famines will result? So basically saying is, do we have enough food? If we don't, are we going to have soon we have like all these famines and people would die? So that's the question. So the answer is there's no real sign of scarcity of food. So food production is far more efficient in our time than it's ever been before. See, prior to the 20th century, famines occurred far more frequently than they do now, and they were far more widespread. So, despite a rapid population increase in many regions since World War II, the amount of food available for each person has increased steadily because of improved agriculture methods and better equipment. So, when they looked back and think we don't have enough food, then they didn't really realize that we were going to have such advanced technology that, a few farmers could produce so much food now compared to in the past. They didn't count in the technology that we have today back then. So we have far more food available than ever before. So, except in command economies or traditional in economies that are very inefficient in their economics, because they are unprepared for emergencies and they have inadequate reserves for food, little money to import food, and very few means of even transporting food in these countries that are based on tyranny, based on economics of communal economics instead of the free enterprise. So if there's a national disaster, could cause prolonged droughts. When things flood, thousands of people are malnourished and can starve to death when they don't have, the sources, stored, or the food to be able to share in their community, that they haven't planned for these things economically. So, and that's happening in the world. Um, so let's go here. Let's go on here. This picture here. The world supply of food continues to multiply as scientists develop production methods such as hydroponics, the process of growing plants without soil. Hey, did you know they could grow plants without soil? So let's go on to the next. I'll read our little scripture here verse. It says, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and the cold and the heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Genesis 8:22. So we're looking at, in the future, if we're looking into the future and looking into a future that's viably a moral community, plus in that having moral heart and that biblical heart, we can look to helping each other in the support of this area. So that question. So these events in the command with the command economies that I just talked about, but these events are not caused by worldwide shortages of food, but the result of economic systems that do not allow people to adequately prepare for emergencies, so they fail to develop agriculture methods and technology. So in command economies, they're known not to be, not to flourish in these areas. As for scientists and inventors and entrepreneurs and such, they leave these command economies because they are not supported in these economies. So when we talk about that, that's where we have problems. So let's go here. Let's go on to the next question. Next question said, is the world running out of raw materials? Do the industrial nations of the world have an unfair proportion of Earth's resources? Should mankind use all these natural resources, or should he try to leave the Earth as unchanged as possible? Couple question. Is the world running out of resources? Natural resources. Now, we've had that too. That scare. Oh, we're going to run out of oil. Oh, we're going to run out of coal. Oh, what about copper? All these things. Or what about running out of food, too? So we kind of went over that section. But anyway, the questions, the answers, is alarmists warn that we're on the verge of running out of resources. But few, if any, when we look into these frightening predictions, few, if any of them, have come to pass at all. We haven't run out. The supply of raw materials have actually increased because we are discovering new resources. We're also developing innovative substitutes for certain things, and we're inventing new ways that are more efficient and a means of producing goods. So basically, we've improved a lot of different processes. The process of recycling natural resources is very popular now. So here, they hadn't thought about these things. We hadn't thought about, well, maybe we'll find some new resources like under the North Pole or something, or in Antarctica, or maybe we'll develop substitutes for certain resources that we have that are just as good. Or maybe we'll invent new ways, of producing certain kinds of goods to make them more efficient of mining and such like that. And then, of course, we know that we love to recycle, don't we? So that's important. An example here they have of is copper. Here's a picture here. Copper is a valuable resource in technology, power, machinery, and transportation. Look at that copper mine. I was trying to figure out whether it looks familiar. It looks like I've seen that before. But anyway, this copper mine. So several decades ago, geologists and economics, they predict that copper would become scarce. And it's because there wouldn't be enough metal unavailable, they thought. But now innovations in mining technology have mined veins of copper where they knew they couldn't before. And so now the scientists have discovered new deposits in these veins. They know how to get in there now with the mining technology to take the copper from these veins. They never thought they could. So today copper is more common, yet it's still valuable, and because it's a resource, and a lot of different developing technologies need copper. So it has become even more important of a resource, and in improving, it's also an improvement of machinery and transportation and copper. So, so copper, at one time we thought it would be extinct, but it is not. It is more common than we ever thought it would be.
So here it says, let's go on here. Since the dawn of history,
The overall availability of natural resources has been going up, not down. Bet you didn't know that. By allowing finite raw materials to be sold at market prices, free market capitalism also solves the dilemma of how best to distribute resources. And those who can use those resources efficiently will buy them, while those who cannot will waste their money. So Americans must resist the push by globalists to confiscate and redistribute the world's resources. For a healthy free market economy can solve the problems of diminishing resources and their fair distribution better than any global bureaucracy. Okay, that's pretty important, because a healthy free market can solve the problems here of these diminishing resources and fair distribution. If you have government control and bureaucracies, you're going to end up with a big mess. So Americans must resist the push and not go by globalists. Globalists will say, okay, you need to give us your natural resources, or this is what you need to do. You need to redistribute your natural resources. We must resist the globalists in every aspect. And globalists, when I think of globalists, I think of an antichrist, is what I think of. The globalists, plus you look at any globalist, and they are not going to stand behind Christianity, that is for sure. So, let's go on. These questions are pretty common, aren't they? You probably have had them before.
okay. Going on here before change, many environmentalists claim that man is merely a type of animal, such as a monkey or a bear, that he has no right to use the earth's resources or change the earth's landscape, saying man should not be able to do anything. But the Bible makes it clear otherwise, doesn't it? So man is the special creation of God, and God has given the world for man in the Bible. So these environments say man is just an evolutionary animal, and man has no rights. The other animals have just as much rights. Is not biblical in nature. That is for sure. So it makes it clear that man is a special creation, and that the world's natural resources were created for his benefit. And let me go ahead and read this. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." So the Bible says otherwise, doesn't it? So let's go on to the next question. So getting towards the last questions here. The next question says, are the world's sources of energy near to be exhausted? We're talking about energy now. Will the future generations shiver in the dark? Will future generations shiver in the dark because coal and petroleum and natural gas and other fuels have been depleted? So, answer, the Earth's stores of energy resources are far from being depleted. So, future generations will have more energy resources than ever before.
going on here. Prospectors and scientists locate new sources of energy and develop new sources all the time. They're finding new sources. This goes on here. It says in the 1970s, temporary man-made shortages of petroleum oil. We talk about oil. And they thought that basically tremendous deposits, they have been tapped in regions of the North Sea now, they found. So now we say there was a temporary shortage, and what did they find? They found a huge amount of oil in regions such as the North Sea. And new mining techniques now give us a limit, limitless supply of coal. So coal is yet available. They found new supplies of coal. Forestry has increased in these woodlands, and technology has helped forestry. And actually, forestry has been advanced in a lot of different areas where they're growing tons of trees, even though trees, you think, oh, as a resource, wood is an important resource, and the growing of trees is too. So we can see the question again, has it been answered? Are world's sources of energy near to be exhausted? The answers would be no. The advanced nations have developed nuclear power plants too for peaceful uses. And basically nuclear power may be a type of energy that would be very viable in the future. And now they even have safe methods of disposing radioactive material too. So these things, modern dams. Now these dams coming in, are a renewable source of energy and power as we get from the rushing water from the dams, hydroelectrics. Onto the engineers researching the efficiency of powers of the wind, the power of the wind, and the power of solar power. So we have all these different avenues that now of energy, don't we? So the world is growing richer in energy resources. So that question has been answered. Question 5, down here, is our industrial civilization, that means our industry, the industries, are they polluting the air, the water, and the land to such an extent that the survival of the human race is threatened? Okay, that's important. Are our industries and such, are they polluting the air so much that now we won't be able to go on living? The answer to this is no, too. Although pollution does need to be taken seriously, and there needs to be some regulation in this area, we can see some places basically do have those areas, in some countries, where we have pollution. Let me go on here. It says, but on the other hand, it says, okay, let me read this over because I kind of went over it. Once again, the answer is no. Although pollution does need to be taken seriously, in some places there is more industrial pollution today than there was in Adam Smith's time before the development of heavy industry. But on the other hand, many forms of pollution were more common and more deadly back then. For example, some towns, they didn't have adequate trash removal, of course, and they didn't have a drainage system for their sewage back then. And so they had a lot of vermin and diseases, and they didn't even know, they hadn't really discovered bacteria even at this time. So when you look back there, when they said, we have a lot of pollution, today we have answered some of these pollution problems by sanitary conditions now and getting rid of trash. So modern technology now has enabled mankind to reduce all kinds of pollutants now, and the public now is aware of ways to prevent pollution more than ever, even more than it was 30 and 40 years ago. So we can prevent pollution, and the prevention, it says preventing pollution sometimes adds to the cost of production, yet most forms of prevention do not increase costs so greatly as to seriously damage productive efficiency. And an example here they put is the 5 Great Lakes of the United States, which together form the largest body of water in the world, are being redeemed from industrial pollution, even though one lake was erroneously pronounced dead and another dying. Now they're not. Many other examples. Yeah, so we think about the Great Lakes. When we think about the Great Lakes, now they basically said they were going to be dead by now, and now we see the opposite happening. Um,
So most of the pollution that we see even in the world, you've got to say the horribly polluted places have been in command economies. When you look into communist, especially economies. And so because they haven't taken the incentives and the technologies needed to reduce pollution, they've gone ahead and just polluted certain areas. But now, even these cases have been becoming less polluted. So there is, basically in a free society, it's the process of ingenuity is, yes, we need to prevent pollution in our industry. So, okay, those questions are very important that we answer those. So we need to know, okay, we're not overpopulated. Our food is not going to be so scarce that we're not going to have food at this sense, and we go on to our energy. We have sources of energy, although all these things can be taken away in a huge, gigantic world war, right? And of course, God is in charge, and His judgment can come. I mean, our whole world can be hit by a meteor or whatever, but we see in the Bible what's going to happen in the future. So, when I say prophets of doom, the reason is that we look and there's going to be judgment is because of our sin and because we have gone away from the true living God. So I want to go back here. It's one area that I know we're not having much time, but I just want to go over this one prophet of doom. He said, Thomas Robert Malthus, 1766 to 1834. And the reason they called him this prophet of doom, and he was back, we're talking about 1700s, was because he believed of the population growing so large that it wouldn't support the world. So he lived in the 18th century, and he had the romantic belief that man is basically good. Is man basically good? No. The Bible says our heart is evil beyond measure. That's why we need Jesus to come and die for us and take our sin and to give us a new heart. So, and he believed that society would be constantly improving and prosperity. He was an English minister, and he changed his profession to be an economist, went into economy. He wrote the essay on the principle of the population as it affects the future improvement of society. So his focus was on principle of population. So he gave gloomy predictions and turned the economy, the study of economy, into a dismal science, and shattered the utopian dreams of this whole thing. So back then they thought, this is the way they thought, but Malthus actually said, well, the number of people multiplying in the earth is geometric. So it would go like 1, 2, 4, 16, 32, 64 in a geometric rate. And he said the amount of food is going arithmetic, like arithmetic base, arithmetic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he said the population is growing way more rapidly than the food. And so he said basically we're going to have famines and disease, in the future. And so there was errors, according to Malthus, he believed that the population this way would turn to famine and that way reduce the birth rate. But anyway, there's errors in his reason. First of all, that his population figures were faulty. That's not the way population grows necessarily. And then also, he did not see the advances in agriculture and the technologies of the future. That the food would be provided because of a great technology in agriculture and production in certain countries would be produced a huge amount of food for the world.
And then also, he basically said, like, many now believe the world's resources are sufficient. He didn't believe that the world's resources were sufficient. So just like we went over, so the technology will develop to ensure, you know, the human race is what went on for here. But anyway, just think of this guy, Thomas Robert Malthus, and he was one of the, back in the 1700s, that started this whole thing, is that overpopulation is our main problem. And now we know it's not.